Staggered Kluson style tuners are my favorite. They look classic, are easy to string and de-string, keep your fingertips safe, and with a different height for every pair of strings, they create a perfect break angle for every string, which eliminates the need for a string tree. The first step for installation is to make sure the holes in the headstock are an appropriate match for the bushings. In this case, the bushings are very obviously far too loose, and with digital calipers, it's easy to see why. The tuner holes in the headstock measure 10 mm in diameter, while the bushings measure 8.8 mm in diameter. The solution to this is aftermarket adapter bushings, which are sized for larger hole diameters. Here I have a set of Kluson MB65LN adapter bushings, which are made to fit 10 mm tuner holes. These ones measure 9.92 mm wide. They press in firmly by hand, but just a little too easily. I can also press them out with minimal effort using a transfer punch by hand. Typically with a snug-fitting bushing, I'll need to give the transfer punch a few taps with a hammer to knock it out. For a tighter fit, I'll wet the tuner holes with a generous amount of Titebond and let it sit for 10 or 20 minutes to swell the wood. Adding Titebond and pressing the bushings in by hand immediately can also work, but I prefer verifying that the fit is right before I press the bushings in. A proper fit will be too hard to press in by hand, but easy to press in mechanically. I use a tool my longtime friend and mentor Steve Kubecka came up with. A 2.5-inch C-clamp with a flat steel bar TIG welded to one end. The steel is covered in leather for protection. The padded side goes underneath the headstock for support, while the top presses the bushing in. The Titebond made a very obvious difference here, with the bushing pressing in much more firmly. I'll repeat the same process for the other bushings until all of them are installed, and then it's time to load in the tuners. That would go really smoothly if these were the correct size. Whoops. Apparently the Kluson adapter bushings don't have the correct internal diameter to fit the Godot vintage staggered tuner shafts. I'm going to have to get the transfer punch and the hammer and knock all of these out, then use Godot brand adapter bushings instead. The Godot bushings measure 10.17 mm, which is a bit wider than the tuner holes. To get them to fit, I'll have to use a peg hole reamer. I use the semi-fluted reamer from StuMac. The goal here is to enlarge the hole just enough to press the bushing halfway in by hand, but requiring a clamp to press it in the rest of the way. That will ensure that the hole is tight enough for a secure fit, but not so tight that the bushing cracks the peg head. With the correct bushings installed and looking good, we can move on to installing the actual tuners. The key here is getting them straight. Mylar film protects the headstock, while I put a beveled Starrett straight edge against the tuners. Using the same special clamp as before, the padded side goes on the face of the peg head, while the regular side clamps the straight edge in place. This allows the use of a 6-inch machinist ruler to straighten the tuners on the other side, as well as adjusting the tuners side to side so they're spaced evenly apart. Using this hooked probe I got at the electronics store, I make a set mark by eye as close to the center of the hole as possible. You can use the machinist ruler while doing this to make sure the tuners don't move at all, but if you're careful, you can do just fine without it. Then drill pilot holes into the set marks using the smallest brad point bit you can find, in this case 5/64. I drill to half the depth of the screw, and while you can wrap the bit in tape to mark the depth and use a drill press, here I'm just doing it by eye with a cordless drill. Putting the tuners back in and applying some aptly named screw wax to the tuner screws, I drive them in. The wax really helps the screws thread in trouble-free more than you'd think, and this particular wax is the best I've found. With the tuners installed, this neck has really come a long way. The whole thing is looking great, is going to play great, and we're finally closing in on the final steps. Tune in to part 5 to see the installation of the neck on a Fender Stratocaster body. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.